A preliminary report into last month's Air India disaster has found that the engines were starved of fuel seconds after takeoff. The report by Indian Aviation accident investigators said that the plane's engine fuel cut-off switches almost simultaneously flipped from run to cut-off, causing the Boeing 787 Dreamliner to lose thrust and sink down.
Now, the crash killed 241 of the 242 people on board and at least 29 on the ground. According to the report, one pilot can be heard on the cockpit voice recorder asking the other why he cut off the fuel. The other pilot responds saying that he didn't. At the crash site, both fuel switches were found in the run position, and the report says there'd been indications of both engines relighting before the low altitude crash.
Let's get more on this now. We're joined by Keith Tonkin, an aviation expert and managing director at Aviation Projects. Keith, good morning. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Thomas.
The plane's engine fuel switches, they were flipped off within seconds of each other. So as we just said, they shifted from run to cut off. What exactly does that mean for those of us who haven't been in a cockpit?
Yeah, it means that almost certainly one of the pilots, who would be the only people able to access those switches, has made the decision to physically switch the fuel off to the engines.
So I'm trying to get my head around why that action would theoretically be taken so quickly, because flicking them off starved the engines. It was only 3 seconds after takeoff. Why would one do that in theory?
Well, the reason is unthinkable. We don't know, and there's very little information in the preliminary report to explain that. All it says is what happened, not why and how, and it's very unusual, even inexplicable, that a pilot would do that when the aircraft is in such a vulnerable position just after takeoff.
As Kath mentioned there a minute ago, the report has said one pilot is heard on the cockpit voice recorder that was obviously recovered after the crash, asking the other why he cut off the fuel. It's not clear at the moment which pilot said that, but the other pilot responded he did not do so. He didn't flick that switch. Makes me want to ask you, Keith, can these switches, be automatically flipped, or do they need to be manually changed?
Yeah, they need manual intervention. They're designed so that you can't inadvertently bump them so that the fuel gets cut off. Obviously, it's important to have fuel flowing to the engines unless you deliberately turn them off in the event of an emergency where the procedure requires that. So it would not normally be done, and it's a deliberate thing to do that.
Okay, so just to reiterate, this is not a situation based on where they are in the cockpit that you could in any way, shape or form accidentally flip them?
It'd be very unlikely that that would have happened.
Okay. At the crash site as well, as we said a minute ago, what intrigues me is, and obviously this is early days, but both fuel switches were actually found in the run position. So they'd gone from cut-off apparently back in to the run position, and the report said there'd been indications of both engines relighting before this low-altitude crash. What do you think happened there? I mean, does that indicate a pilot consciously then flipped them back on before it was, but it was too late by then, obviously?
Well, the report doesn't say how they were re-established to the run position. We can assume that a pilot would have done that, and it indicates that there was an attempt to try and recover the aircraft while those engines were relighting, but unfortunately they were just too close to the ground for that to happen in time for them to fly away safely.
The investigations, obviously, it's narrowed its focus now to that movement of those fuel control switches, but it also says it's focusing at least partly on engine thrust issues. What could that mean, engine thrust issues?
I think it's mostly to do with how much power or thrust was available at the time, and the fact that the fuel was cut off meant that there wasn't enough thrust to sustain flight, and while the engines were restarting, they didn't restart in time to recover the situation.
Based on what you know, and I mean, there was a lot of speculation when Vision came out of this crash of different aviation experts looking at the plane and where different parts of it were pointing at the time of the crash. Has it surprised you at all that this investigation's narrowed down to actually the inevitable manual manipulation of those fuel control switches?
Well, it seems as though that's a very important cause. So there'll be many others, but very likely this is the most important one and the full report will explain that in more detail. But it's almost unthinkable that a pilot would deliberately shut off the fuel to the engines just after takeoff in such a vulnerable position, which led to the cause ultimately to have that aircraft crash and to have all the people on board minus one lucky one to survive that one.
Just on that then, why, in what circumstance would you switch off? Why are those switches there? Why would you switch off the fuel? What's a normal scenario where you'd do that?
It could be if an engine has had some sort of malfunction and you want to stop it from being supplied fuel. If it's on fire or if there's other damage being caused, you may deliberately shut off an engine. The aircraft can still fly safely on one, and pilots practice engine failures after takeoff, and the procedure would normally involve securing the engine, which also includes turning off the fuel to it. So there are procedures set out in which case you would do that.